Hello, I'm Rashana Levin with Keller Williams Realty. So today I want to talk about the residential sales contract for Virginia. And this is the Northern Virginia market. So I'm not sure if you actually see this video. I'm just talking about Northern Virginia. So this is this is overview. This is just for educational purposes only. So this sales contract is offered on, so date of offer, if you are submitting a contract today, it would be today's date, between your name. If you're purchasing with someone else, it would be your name and their name, or whoever's first or second, and the seller. So that could be a husband and wife, it could be a person, it could be a business entity, LLC. So that would go there because it's whoever owns the house at that time. So who, among other things, hereby confirm and acknowledge by their initials and signatures herein that by prior disclosure in this real estate transaction, blank. So the listing brokerage, so that's the person with the sign in the yard hanging in the wind, they represent the seller. And blank cooperating brokerage represents the buyer. So that would be Keller Williams, because if you hire me, that would be that name there, and the buyer box would be checked. So paragraph. So when I talk about this contract, different things, I'm going to say paragraph and then what the number is and what it is. So paragraph 1, real property. Buyer will buy and seller will sell for the sales price. Seller entire interest in real estate property with all improvements, rights, and appurtenances described as follows. So this is the tax ID. So this is basically the legal description. What lot is it? Is it in a special section? What's the subdivision? If it's a condominium, what's the condominium name? Is there parking spaces? If are there parking spaces numbers? How many spaces are there? The county, where is it located? The deed, where is it actually recorded at the courthouse with the deed book and page number? Now we come to street address. If there's a unit number, that has to go there. The city and the zip code. We already know it's Virginia, so we don't have to say that. So paragraph 2. Sorry, I scrolled too much. So price. Paragraph 2 is price and financing. Any percentages are percentages of the sales price. So it could either be, you could put the numbers or percentages. I prefer to use percentages because if we have to go back and forth with sales price, I would have to change numbers to, I just like a clean contract. I don't like all those things being crossed out and whatnot. It's just easier to just use the percentages. But if you want me to change that, we can do that. It's not really necessary. I just want you to know the difference. Both of those items do not have to be filled out. That's really what I want to reiterate. So down payment, are you putting any money down? Is it going to be 100% financing? So that would be filled out there. So if it's 100% financing, that would be blank because there is no down payment in 100% financing. So that would be different. So let me just talk about that for a minute. So if you're getting a program that is 100% financing, then there would be no down payment. But if you're getting an FHA loan or another conventional loan or a USDA loan that does not require down payment, that requires down payment, then you have to put the percentage there, which I would walk you through that. I just want you to know the differences. So, oh, well, I'm getting 100% financing. You are, but it's a certain way that it has to be filled out in the contract. So B, under paragraph 2. So financing. So your first trust. So the first trust, so you have a loan. So if you have a first and second, the first and the second will be filled out. So the first trust, so this is the amount. It could be sales price, it could be a percentage here. And then you actually have to select what type of financing. What type of financing is it? Is it a conventional loan? Is it a VA loan? Is it a FHA loan? Is it USDA? So is it a seller held trust? Haven't seen that. but it's there because it's possible. In total financing amount, you could do percentage, or it could be the amount or sales price. So you choose either or. It's not the price, it's either or. And then the sales price. What is the sales price? And are you actually, it just makes it easier. They changed the contract a couple months ago. So the seller subsidy. Are you asking for closing costs? Because this used to be on a separate addendum. It was long. It was further in the contract, so it wasn't really clear. Like, what were you asking for? It just makes it easy. I like that it's in section 2 of the contract now. Say that here, and is this contract contingent upon financing? I would say yes if you're not paying cash. That's just I would always assume. You shouldn't assume, but if you're getting financing, something could go wrong. So you always want to have a contingency in place. Even if the lender, you're good to go, you just have to have that. You have to have that contingency. So moving right along, this is going to be your earnest money deposit section. So buyer deposit in the amount of blank. So it could be either check or wire funds. The second option would not be checked. And then who is it held by? The escrow agent. And buyer blank has delivered deposit to escrow agent, or blank will deliver by a certain number of contract ratification. But still in Virginia, you could say 10 days after, but you still have to, you have no contract unless you have deposited the funds. So it's important that you know that. So settlement, and have the right to choose who you want. You have to choose that ahead of time because we have to know who's going to hold escrow. So important to note, if the settlement date falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, then the settlement will be on the prior business day. So if there's a holiday on a Monday, you have to close on the Friday. But I look at the calendar, so we won't have those issues. This is just education, so you know what that means. So that's also have to put it again here. Buyer elects here. You say you have 10 days, but really don't have that long to decide, because you could change it, but the title company and the lender have to work hand in hand, so you really don't have that timeline to work that out. So you have to figure that out, I would say, ahead of time. So if you don't like my recommendations on who to use, then I would recommend that you do that ahead of time. You figure that out, because we have to know who that is. As soon as we're under contract, the contract actually has to be submitted to everyone that's involved. So down payment. The balance of the down payment will be paid on or before settlement date by a certified or cashier's check, or by wired funds as required by the settlement agent. An assignment of funds shall not be used prior to written consent by the seller. Of documents. So how are all these things going to be delivered? So you don't really have a choice of how they're delivered. You just have to state, if they decide to deliver a certain document to you, you have to put all those items here. So if it's by mail, if that's what they're going to choose, then you have to put your mailing address. What is your email address? I mean, nobody uses faxes anymore, but it is there. So I would say no to the fax, because nobody uses fax machines. Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. So in Virginia, you have to have the disclosure statement delivered to you by a certain time. You would have that ahead of time, because is required. It would be in the system. So it would be in the system. So you don't write contracts without it. But they have 3 days to deliver it to you in person. Next, let's talk about, so paragraph 8. Virginia Property Owners Association. So Property Owners Association Act is also the same thing as Homeowners Association. So if the property is located in a homeowners association, the first box will be checked. If it's not, then the second box will be checked. This is a whole section on the locations of having your right to cancel, the number of days. Once you receive the document, you have a certain number of days. You have a certain number of days after you receive the package to cancel the contract. This is the method of delivery. How do you want that? If it's electronic, that's going to be your email there. If it's a hard copy, that's going to be your property address. And if it's a condominium, the first box will be checked, the second box will not be checked. And something to note, some communities have HOAs or otherwise POAs and condos. So it's possible that both of them could be checked. So if both of them are checked, then your information will be filled out. You don't have to worry about filling it out because I will do that for you, but this is for educational purposes only. And how will that document be delivered? So property maintenance and condition. So I would say as of the date of home inspection, I usually check that, or date of offer, but it's not a wrong or right box to check there. And if you are getting a home inspection, which I would highly recommend that you do, this box on paragraph 10, so a contract is contingent upon home inspection, that will be checked. If you waive your inspection, that box will be checked. Access to the property. So we can't just keep going to the property all the time, but based on without seller approval. So we have certain times that we can go to the property, and you can't just randomly go to the property. So utilities. What kind of utilities are in the home? So is it public? Is it private well? Is it community well? Is it oil, gas, or electric? All of those things would be checked here if they were. Is it two zone? Is it heat pump? All those things there. So items that do not convey. So this is personal property and fixtures. Property includes the following personal property and fixtures, if existing: built-in heating and air conditioning equipment, plumbing and lighting fixtures, sub pump, attic and exhaust fans, storm doors, storm windows, screens, wall-to-wall carpeting, window shades, blinds, window treatments, hardware, smoke and heating detectors, antennas, exterior trees and shrubs. Unless otherwise agreed to in writing, all surface and wall mount electronic components devices do not convey. However, it is all related mounts, brackets, and hardware do convey. If more than one of the item conveys, number of items is noted. So that's important. So now we come to this section. What actually conveys with the home? If it conveys, it's yes. If it does not, then it's no. And then the number of items, especially if it's a ceiling fan. So if it's a ceiling fan, if it's like 8 ceiling fans, you want to put 8 ceiling fans conveys. And, if I am skeptical about, the actual property that's there, because in the contract, as you can see here, it does not say, okay, well, the GE wash and dryer conveys. It just says a wash and dryer conveys. So if we want to get technical, I take pictures of it, put serial numbers like these items, we can actually add that to the contract. So there's no confusion, there's no misunderstanding is what I call it. So if there are fuel tanks here, if there's other things, so all those things will be checked. If there's any lease items, they have to say that to you. So I had talked about FERPTA, so that is, actually no, that was the other video, sorry. So IRS FERPTA. So withholding taxes for a foreign seller. So if the seller is or is not a foreign person, based on the Foreign Investment in Real Estate Property Act, if the seller is a foreign person, the buyer may be required to withhold or pay Internal Revenue Service up to 15% of the sales price on behalf of the seller and file an IRS form that includes both seller and buyer tax identification numbers. Parties agree to cooperate with each other and the settlement agent. So it's important that we know ahead of time whether it's the seller. Not saying that you can't purchase the home, but if they don't withhold the money, then it will be your responsibility to withhold it at a later time, which we can talk about that if you have any questions about that. So buyer representations. So is this going to be your primary residence or is it not? So if you're an investor, then it's not your primary residence. So you have to, whatever your intent is with the property, it has to be there, because you're misrepresenting things, and that would be illegal if you're purchasing a home using a particular loan with your intent is like, oh, well, I'm going to live there, but then you change your mind. It's like, oh, well, I'm not going to live there. So you can't do that. So smoke detectors, that's paragraph 15. The seller shall deliver the property with smoke detectors installed and functioning per regulations in Virginia. If it is in the lead-based paint, if it was built before 78, it would be checked were, and you have the right to do a inspection on that at your expense. Wood destroying insect inspection. So it says none, but all lenders require it. So I'm not really sure why they added this to this contract, but I'm reviewing it. So buyer's expense. I always say that the buyer should pay for it because you know that it was done, it was completed, because that's usually something that is missed, believe it or not, in a contract, the termite inspection. So I always have it done with the home inspection. My logic behind that is if there was damage to the home, we have to have time to fix the damage. I can't do a home inspection, I mean, not a home inspection, a termite inspection a day before a settlement and find out there's damage, because then we can't close, because you have to have a clear termite inspection. If there was treatment that was needed, you have to have time to do that. So that's why I always combine the two. It doesn't cost that much. And if there was damage to the home, the seller would have time to actually rectify and fix that. So damage or loss. So the home is technically not yours, and that is the truth. It is not yours until you close on the home. So if something happens to the house in the interim, you being under contract, this is paragraph 19, damage or loss, it's still up to the seller to bring it back to how it was. So if a tree falls in the house, hopefully not, but if that happens, the seller would have to fix that with their insurance, and we would see how that happens. So basically, the seller has to fix it how it was, and you're not responsible for any damages as long as you didn't damage the home. So title, the title company has to, well, the seller has to convey that the title is good, markable, and insurable. So what that means is if there was what's called a cloud on title, they actually have to make the title good and marketable, because the lender will not fund the loan if the title is not marketable. But what does that really mean? So an example would be if a husband and wife owned a home and they took the wife off title, but the county has really it wasn't really recorded right, or something wasn't done correctly, and the title company pull the title and they still see that the wife is on it, but there was like a complaint or something. So that would be an example. So it's all kinds of things that could actually happen as clouds on title, or if it was a lien that wasn't paid off and the seller is disputing that it was paid off, so there's an issue there. So that's a possibility. So a lot of things that can happen in real estate. So paragraph 21. So notice of potential filing of mechanics liens is talking about that. So that's important, why you need to have owner's title insurance. And we can talk about that later. So possession date. So you can't possess the home. I shouldn't say possess. I don't really like that. When can you take possession? The day of settlement, not before. Hopefully not before. That's just not recommended that you take early possession. Can you move in early? I wouldn't recommend that. Fees. So anything that fees are prorated, talks about broker fee, the seller agrees to pay and disperse all commission at the title company, which the seller pays the buyer agent fee. Adjustments, so everything is prorated. Attorney fees, if that was needed at some time. I was talking about attorney fees if there was a potential legal dispute, not talking about actually your file closing. Performance, you're supposed to perform. So if you're supposed to close on a certain day and certain things aren't done, then you are in breach for performance. So, and there's a whole paragraph 28 is on, which it takes up about like half the page, about like default, who's in default, and what causes that. Other disclosures, property condition, legal requirements, financing, what broker is, property taxes, property insurance, talking about title insurance, Assignability, so you can't assign this contract to someone else. So definitions, so this is important. I'm going to spend some time on this. So date of ratification. So date of ratification is the date that you're actually under contract, which means the date of delivery of the final acceptance in writing by the buyer and seller of all terms of this contract, the buyer and seller, not the date of expiration or removal of any contingencies. So appraisal, that is written appraisal of value. So days means calendar days unless otherwise specified in this contract. So, and reference of time of day refers to the time Eastern time zone in the United States. For the purposes of computing time periods, the first day will be the day following delivery of the time period will end at 9 p.m. on the date specified. Notices means a unilateral communication of one party to another. All notices required under this contract will be in writing and will be effective as of the date of delivery. Written acknowledgement of receipt of the notice is courtesy but not required. All right, so I'm going to touch on J. So seller subsidy is a payment from the seller towards the buyer's charges, including but not limited to loan origination fees, discount points, buy down, or subsidy fees, prepaids, or other charges, as allowed by the lender, if any. If the buyer's responsibility to it's the buyer's responsibility to confirm with any lender that the entire credit provided herein may be utilized. If the lender prohibits the seller from payment of any portion of this credit, then said credit will be reduced to the amount allowed by the lender. So really, what does that mean? That means, okay, if you ask the seller the contract, in a perfect world, right now we're in a seller's market, but this is just for educational purposes. So let's say that I was able to negotiate with the seller that you could get $10,000 in a seller subsidy. But the lender said that you could not get all of that. So what happens to the money? So the seller gets their money back. So really, we got to know ahead of time, okay, what's the maximum amount that you can get paid on your behalf by the seller. So that's important, which we can talk about that. So void contract, so you talk about that. So home warranty, are you asking for a warranty? Yes. What type of warranty is going to be? Who's paying for it? Time is of the essence. And are you licensed real estate agent? If you are, if you're inactive, if you're in Virginia, are you in another state? I actually have represented a couple people that were licensed. And so this is additions to this contract. So this is just a sales contract. So these are items that will be accompanied to the actual contract. So if they are part of the contract, we check no. Oh, if they are, sorry. If they are, yes. If they are not, we check no. And other terms, are there any other terms that you want to add here? Any other requirements? And data ratification. So this would not be filled out until everybody has accepted all the terms, and then you would initial at the bottom. You initial on the right hand side. If you're purchasing with somebody else, they would sign as well. And then this section of after the asterisk line, this on the left hand side, this would be for the listing agent, and the right hand side is the buyer's agent. And so that's all for that. So now we come to the conventional financing and appraisal contingency addendum. So there are a couple addendums based on your financing type. So I'm just going to overview conventional. Not saying you have to use conventional. It's just most of the forms look the same. It's just that I don't want this to be an hour-long video. So they're pretty much the same language. You have to have a contingency, but the document will be different based on the financing you choose. So this addendum made on, that will be the date of the sales contract offered on. That's the date between the buyer, that's your name, and the seller, that's their name. Seller property, that's the property address. So what type of loan is it going to be? So as a first trust, you're going to obtain a fixed rate for how many years? 30 years, not to exceed the interest rate of, say, 3.5%, 2%, whatever it is. And if you're doing a second trust, that would be filled out as well, which you would know that ahead of time because I would contact the lender to see what type of a loan you're getting. Alternate financing, that's a paragraph you can look at, but we shouldn't need that, but that is there just in case. So, paragraph 4, financing contingency with an automatic extension. So this contract is a contingent of, by delivering the seller at 9 p.m. blank days after date of ratification, written conditional commitment for specified financing. So section B, if the buyer has not delivered written conditional commitment, this contingency will continue up to and including the settlement date. However, upon expiration of the financing deadline, the seller may, at the seller's option, deliver notice to the buyer that the buyer has 3 days to void the contract. If the buyer does not void the contract within 3 days following the seller's notice, this financing contingency will be removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect without this financing contingency. Paragraph C. Buyer may void this contract by delivering to the seller prior to satisfaction or removal of this contingency a written rejection from the lender to whom the buyer has applied specified financing. D. Nothing herein shall prohibit the parties from mutually agreeing to the terms acceptable to parties herein. So what does all that mean? I said a whole bunch of stuff. So basically, with every contract, if you have a financing contingency, so you have a certain number of days that the lender has to basically compile all your file. You might have two last conditions that you have to make. They might have to do a verification of employment. They may have to do some things at the end, but everything else is good to go. So basically, they're committing to lend to you. When you actually get a pre-approval, they're saying, well, yeah, based on the things we looked at, we're good, but it still has to go through the underwriting process. So they have to be able to do that, you have to have a house to be able to go through the underwriting process with the appraisal and all your other documents that they've requested and asked for. So once all of those things have been completed, you could get a conditional approval, which they're committing to lend to you. They're saying, as long as you do X, Y, and Z, we're going to fund the loan. That's basically what they're saying. But what this document is saying, if you have not delivered that by the date in the contract, that the seller can give you notice and say, well, you got 3 days to do this. If you haven't done it by this date, then we are removing the contingency. So what that means is if you remove the contingency and you can't close based on the financing, then you do not get your earnest money deposit back. So that's really what that's talking about. So you have two options. So you can choose paragraph 3 or paragraph 4. So it's automatic extension, paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 is an automatic expiration. I usually choose automatic extension instead of automatic expiration. But of course, we send this to the seller. They can choose to change it. It's all, everything is all negotiable, but that's just what I like to do. So paragraph 5. So this contract is contingent. That box will always be checked if you're doing financing, if I'm writing it. So buyers shall have until 9 p.m. blank, minimum of 21 days. So 21 days, it'll be 21 days or longer in that box. So your deadline, so you have that deadline, you have, if I say 25 days, so we have 25 days to actually get the appraisal back and submit it to them. So if the appraisal comes in low, so 3 things can happen. So the appraisal can come in right at the sales price. The appraisal could come in greater than the sales price. Or the appraisal could come in less than the sales price. So you have 3 options at that point. If the appraisal comes in at sales price, then we're good to go. There's no issues. But there would be an issue if the appraisal came in low. So I always use the example of 400,000. So if it's 400,000 and the appraisal comes in at 380, at that point I would ask the seller to lower the price to 380 because the lender is only going to give you what the appraisal value is of the house. And we have to do that basically as soon as possible, as soon as you get the appraisal. So it's important that you, as soon as you get it, you let me know what that is. And make sure you watch my video on how to find out where the value is, because it's important. You're looking at the document, but you don't know where to look, because there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of words on the document. So if you don't know exactly what page to go on. So that's that. So negotiation period, this talks about with the appraisal. It shouldn't take that long, but there is a paragraph on this. Lender required repairs, and then you would sign a date at the bottom. And then the last part of the document that I want to talk about is home inspection and radon testing. So I would always recommend that you get a radon inspection if required. You can look that up to understand what that is. So home inspection with option to repair or avoid the contract. So that's paragraph 1. And then you would initial on this side and put the dates there. So the negotiation period would be there and your election period. So at that point you can decide whether you want to stay with the contract or not. So option 2, home inspection with the option to void only. So what this means is you're going to do the inspection and then you already know that, the seller, like especially if it's a hot seller's market, and you already know they're not going to fix anything. At that point, you would say, okay, well, if it's something major, then I'll walk away. But you're not going to try to negotiate with the seller because you already know it's not satisfactory to you, so I just want to be able to avoid the contract. You can do that. Then this is radon inspection. So this talks about, well, you have to have a certain time period that the test has to be there. And all of these tests, inspections, appraisals, all of these things are of your expense because these are things that you want to know for your information. So the seller's not going to pay for these things. It's up to you. So the important lesson behind all this is to make sure that the house that you're choosing to submit an offer on is the house you really want, because you're not going to get that money back. I mean, it's for your protection to do them, but if you decide to walk away, then you have to basically start all over. But it is your right to do that if you choose. You just have to do it within the timeline that you have based on the contingency deadline. And then you would sign and date. And this is all for the Virginia contract document. So this is the package that would actually be submitted. In addition to this, what document will be added is the disclaimer from the seller disclosure. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Rashana Levin with Keller Williams Realty.